Are you trying to establish your brand as a thought leader? Start a podcast, invite industry experts to be guests on your show, and watch your brand become the prime resource for decision makers in your industry. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Hey everybody, Logan with Sweetfish here. Before we get straight into today's interview, I wanted to let you know about another podcast you might enjoy. If you're a regular listener of this show, you'll probably really like the B2B Revenue Executive Experience with Chad Sanderson over at Value Selling Associates. Chad is a good friend of ours here at Sweetfish, a phenomenal podcast host. I really liked one of his older episodes from probably a year back with Todd Capone, the author of The Transparency Sale. Great conversation about leveraging honesty, transparency, and a value-added approach in B2B sales. Check out the B2B Revenue Executive Experience with Chad Sanderson on Apple Podcasts or anywhere you do your listening. All right, now let's really get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I've got with me today Jason Emanis. He is the VP of Marketing over at Sceptre Hospitality Resources. Jason, how's it going today, man?
I'm doing great.
So let's get straight into the topic today on brand. I loved this in your LinkedIn bio as I was checking it out before you and I connected today for the interview. And it's, I eat brand for breakfast with a little emoji right there in your LinkedIn bio. I love that, man. Tell us a little bit about how brand is defined in your mind. Because I think a lot of people, we think of logos, we think of our color palette, we think of those creative elements. To you, when you think of brand, especially for a B2B company like you've had a lot of experience in your career, what comes to mind? What definition is there as you think about it?
So we're not going to talk about logos? No. And what I'm about to, what I'll say is things that people have probably heard before. I mean, it's just things that I've picked up over the years from people, a hell of a lot smarter than me. And I like to keep it simple. Brand is really that touch point that your audience has with your company. And by that, I mean, it could be a buyer, it could be an influencer, it could be, anyone, it could be your mom, So it's not a marketing thing. It's really a company thing. And it's an easy to say that statement, every touch point with your audience. It's a lot harder to execute, again, because it's not just one department, it's the whole company.
Yeah, man, you have to just look at a few examples from our consumer lives like Nike and Adidas, right? To know that when you hear those names, there's something that comes to mind. There is an experience, there's a feeling there, right? Compared to another name that you might hear.
Right, and they put a lot of effort in that, right? Back when I was a kid, it was be like Mike. Now it's, be like LeBron and be like, down here in Houston, James Harden. So they just put a tremendous amount of effort, dollars, time, and resources into building up that emotion in, and not just kids, adults are doing the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's transition that to a B2B environment. I think a lot of people have this misconception that B2B purchasing is not as emotional. It's far more logical, but science has proven. I recently read Todd Capone's book, The Transparency Sale, and has a lot in there about the cognitive science of how people make decisions. We could go down that a little bit more, but let's, we offered a consumer brand example example there with Nike and Adidas. Let's talk about a B2B brand where we could maybe point to this emotional decision, or where you've seen decisions made more on brand than features, benefits, the completely logical RFP-based decision-making process that we think is driving everything in B2B, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, what about Salesforce? Why Salesforce and not HubSpot or Microsoft Dynamics? Salesforce ain't cheap, so in order to bring yourself to making that decision, I think a lot goes into, maybe you're thinking, well, my company deserves the best, whatever that means. Or maybe you just simply love you some Benioff. Or Drift's a popular one these days, I've noticed, and their brand has a lot to do with their people, in particular, Dave Council, one of their co-founders, or maybe Dave Gerhardt, their marketing guy. And, what's the difference between Drift and a litany of other, chatbots that marketers can get their hands on? It's they're developing, through their content, whether it's video or their blog posts or whatever, making an emotional connection with buyers, within these companies. And, you're just attracted to it for whatever reason. And like you were saying, a lot of times once that emotional connection is made, the buyer starts to back it up with logic. And ever since I've read a lot of what you're talking about, that you recently read, I find myself in the buying decisions doing the same thing. like I bought Drift last year, and then I backed it up with, well, this is why.
Yeah, absolutely. I was having a conversation offline with a customer the other day, and she was telling me how, she really lobbied for Drift as they were making that decision because she was a fan of everything that they do and the content that they put out for marketers. And I think there's something from that example of Drift. You mentioned, Dave Cancel, Dave Gerhardt being very prominent in the video content that they put out, in the podcast content that they put out, but they took that step that you mentioned there of making a connection with the faces behind the brand to the next level as they built out several different podcasts that are highlighting, their product leader and their growth leader and other people within the team to not only just create content for the other folks that they want to reach, but humanizing and putting forth, in an authentic way, the people behind their brand so that you make that connection because we are humans. We connect with people. We had the Sendoso team on this podcast talking about their Instagram feed and how so many people in B2B are trying to use Instagram the same way as they use other channels. There's a graphic with an ebook, and they were like, no, you need to put faces live and large there because that's what people expect to see in that platform. So kind of a tangent there, but I completely agree with what you're talking about.
I completely agree. And I'm glad you brought it up. On one of my whiteboards, I'm looking at it right now. It says Humanized Marketing. Be human, motives, fears, hopes, desires. You got to touch all that. And I've been here 3.5 years, and ever since I walked in the door, I realized there's some pretty cool, smart people here. I need to make sure that they are market facing, that the market gets to know them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk to marketing leaders day in and day out, and they keep telling me, we have so many great experts. We have so many great SMEs. We have thought leaders within our building. And to me, there's a difference between an expert and a thought leader. And one of those key components is they have to be known, right? That gap of, like you said, being market facing has to happen because no one can follow their thoughts if no one hears their thoughts, right? And so I love the way that you're putting it. It's come up in so many different conversations as we talk with marketers about their podcast strategy, their thought leadership, and their content strategy as a whole. So let's talk a little bit, Jason, about how you can do this effectively. We've talked a little bit about letting people get to know the humans within your walls or within your mini walls if you're a remote team like us. What are some of the other key components of building a brand and building trust through a brand? I imagine it's kind of digging in, at least in my opinion, to what are your differentiators, kind of, like Simon Sinek talks about, start with why. Is that true in your opinion as well?
Yeah, you've got to differentiate yourself. And especially these days, there's just so much noise. There's so much to offer. And in our space, in the hotel technology space, again, I came in 3.5 years ago and I was like, whoa, I mean, there's so many companies and there's so much communication going on that, that how in the world do you break through? And I think you break through making that emotional connection, which means you got to choose why you're different and really, really play on that. So, is it service? Is it customer development? Is it ease of use? Is it design? Maybe you only hire veterans, whatever it is, lock it down and really develop communication around with it. We're a small company amongst giants. I mean, our competitors are huge, and everybody in our industry knows the giant service sucks. I mean, everybody knows it. So the one thing when I came in, I was looking around and I noticed how we were hiring people. So we have great service, and that's not just marketing saying that. That's a company commitment. That's how we hire. All of our account managers were former hoteliers. And so nobody can empathize with our clients better than somebody that was just like them sitting in their seat, So it's a real big differentiator for us. And that's what we've really honed in on the past couple of years, and it's worked really well.
I love that, man. So not only finding what makes you different, but really digging into that truth. So I imagine, just tactically for folks, they might not have the same differentiator. As you mentioned, you gave some very good examples of where you could dig in to find that differentiation and then make that emotional connection between that truth and your buyer's reality. I imagine for you, the next step was digging in with those account managers, having conversations about what was life like, what are the things that sucked, as you pointed out, right?
Yes. Yeah. And and then you once you grab a hold of, okay, this is why we're different now, how in the world do I communicate this and communicate it often? You can't just say it once, the tree falling in the woods kind of thing. So I was struggling with that. But I was talking to, the guy that heads up our account managers, and he was a former client, former hotelier, and he was telling me this story. And he was telling me this story for the second time, because the first time I just missed it because I'm slow. But he was saying, when they chose to go with SHR at the time, they made a conscious decision not to re-up the contract with one of our competitors because they knew their service wasn't going to get them to their goals. And he said it. He's like, we didn't want to be a number, and that's what you are. And the light bulb went on, and it was just like, wait, that's interesting. But at the time, even though he said it and the light bulb went on, and I knew there was something there, I still like, well, okay, why don't I just put that on a T-shirt? You get your account managers to mail them out to clients and ask them to take photos, and we'll get those photos, we'll put them on social posts, maybe with some client quotes of how good our service is and everything, not really knowing if that was going to work. He shook his head and he was like, yeah, that might work, So, okay, great, so walked away. And then, it just started, the photos started pouring in. The clients loved it. They got it. They immediately got, what the phrase meant, what it meant to them, what it meant to us, what it meant to their peers, that were looking. And it's been a real winner for us.
That's fantastic, man. So you guys took that phrase of, I'm not just a number, put it on the T-shirt and then send it out to customers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you go on our social post, it's all over our social post.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. So
I've been stopped at trade shows and like, oh man, I love that. And that's brilliant. And I appreciate that. It's funny when people say things like that, because it took me months to get to a point where, okay, let's try this. And at that point, I wasn't convinced it was going to work. I didn't know, but that's what it takes. It just takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about, you mentioned as we were chatting a little bit offline about this idea of pulling back the curtain. I love that example of just connecting that conversation that you dug into that started with your differentiation, going to your account managers with their expertise, and then keying on that phrase and finding a way to make it shareable, to make it identifiable with your customers. The other thing you've talked about, Jason, is pulling back the curtain and letting your audience see what goes on within your company. I mean, we believe in this here. We literally have a series on this podcast called Behind the Curtain for this very same reason. So I would love to hear a little bit more too on how you guys are doing it and where you've seen the effectiveness, all rolling up to this topic we're talking about here in building a brand.
Yeah. So if you look at the popularity of reality TV, for example. So, funny story. A few years back, this was years ago, but I got wrapped up in trying to put together a reality show with John Hennessy, he's a car guy out here in Houston, and he's got this really interesting shop. But we were out there filming B-roll to try to put together this concept. And this was way before Gas Monkey Garage and some of the reality shows that aren't so much contest. It's just behind the scenes on, a lot of what you see on TV now is just really behind the scenes. People living their life, people doing their job. So I kind of took that experience and, I realized that in order to make an emotional connection, the market has to get to know, like, and trust the people here, and the people will bring that brand, to light. And so again, we have a bunch of hoteliers here, which is a little odd in our space, I think, but and they all have great personalities, and so we make sure that they are market facing as much as we can. I mean, we created little funny videos of the account managers to highlight their hotel experience, not only the number of years, but the hotels where they work. And there's some recognizable brand names in there. And, just a little goofy spin on it, because we added like their hobbies, and had a lot of fun with it. And those have been really popular. And it's just authentic. You just got to be authentic and not be scared. And that's the other thing is that, again, our competitors are big, they're slow, they're corporate. And ever since I got here, I told my team and the executive team, I said, we cannot be that. You can't, don't think we're going to be thought leaders and buy $40,000 reports from some third party and put our name on it. It's like, no, we've got smart, experienced people that we're going to show and let people get to know and that kind of thing. It's worked out really well.
I love it, man. I would say that is more the path to thought leadership than buying those reports or, paying for those analyst boosts and, whatever the case might be. And every industry's kind of got the hacks, the things that, the giants, as you put it, in the space are able to do that the little guys, the up and comers or the scrappy startups don't have. But what we all have is people that we can showcase and that human connection. And you've given people some great ways to think about it. What you said there about the reality TV series and the show that you were producing, and that analogy, I think it was Andy Raskin a while back that made that comment about Drift, going back to your example of them and the way that they've built a brand by humanizing it, by putting their people front and center. He made a comment, something like, what Drift is doing right now is more reality TV than it is marketing. And I mean that in the best way. And I thought that what you said today just reminded me of that. And I thought that was a very telling piece that in B2B, we're still humans, and building a brand is very much the same way. We're leaning into that emotional connection. And you've given people some things to really think about on this today, Jason. I could chat brand all day with you, man. So if anybody listening to this would like to do that, chat brand, ask any follow-up questions, learn more about what you guys are up to, what's the best way for them to reach out or just stay connected with you, man?
Best place to find me is on LinkedIn. I'm pretty indiscriminate about connecting on LinkedIn.
I love it. I am as well. Awesome. Well, Jason, it has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show today, man.
That was great. Thank you.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.